Cartoon debuts of 1961. AP Films, Gerry Anderson. Supercar. This really isn't a cartoon, but it's certainly a children's show. Supercar debuted in Britain. It was a sci-fi adventure show using marionette puppets, a process creator Gerry Anderson called supermarionation. This did very well and led to 3 later series: Fireball XL5 in 1962, Stingray in 1964, and his most famous production, Thunderbirds, in 1965. All of these shows would eventually find their way onto American television. Art Clokey. Davy and Goliath. Art Clokey, creator of Gumby, also created this Christian-themed cartoon series with similar stop-motion animation. It ran for 3 seasons through 1964, then had a 2-season revival from 1971 to 73. 7 specials were made from 1965 to 2004. Disney. Ludwig von Drake. This legendary character made his debut in the first episode of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. He would later appear in the Donald Duck comic strip later that year and receive his own comic book series from Dell. For some reason, the character never really takes in comics, but is used quite heavily on television and other special productions. He was a goofy Austrian scientist and uncle to Donald Duck. 101 Dalmatians. This theatrically released animated film was a major hit and easily the most popular cartoon to have come out in 1961. Who doesn't love lots and lots of spotted puppies? It also features one of Disney's best known and most bizarre villains, Cruella de Vil. Does she ever get her Dalmatian puppy coat? I think not. Format Films. The Alvin Show. The first cartoon series of Alvin and the Chipmunks aired for 1 season on CBS. It was shown in reruns quite a bit for the rest of the decade and for a short time in 1979. The revival series of the 1980s became much better known and longer lasting. Reruns of this classic were played on the Nickelodeon cable channel from 1994 to 96. No station in America has aired it since. Cartoons from this show have rarely been released on any home media. People seem to like this series and want to see it, but it doesn't get a lot of respect from the people who actually own it. Fred Ladd. The Underseas Explorers. Here we go! The rarest, most obscure cartoon to come out this year. It was a series of short, educational cartoons that aired in syndication. It taught you about marine life. This is so hard to find that you can barely find pictures of it online, let alone any episodes. It is said to be like an underwater version of the later, much more popular Jonny Quest, especially with their foreign boy character named Romby, similar to Haji. Ironically, there would be another cartoon series very similar to this called The Undersea Adventures of Captain Nemo. That came out in 1975 and was a bit more successful, becoming a segment of the popular Captain Kangaroo show. What made the idea work in 1975, but not 1961? Who can say? Hal Seeger. Out of the Inkwell. This was a short-lived revival of the classic Out of the Inkwell cartoons from Fleischer Studios, starring Koko the Clown. Besides the main character himself, it bore little resemblance to the earlier cartoons. It was in color, had sound, and gave Koko more of a supporting cast. There was his girlfriend, Coquette the Clown, and a rival of sorts named Mean Mo. Koko himself was a lot friendlier than he had been in the old days. The on-screen battles between Koko and his creator Max Fleischer could get pretty brutal. Although Fleischer himself was still alive and played a part in developing this cartoon, he really wasn't a big part of the stories. Larry Storch, later of TV's F Troop fame, did the voices. This is a charming little cartoon series that, sadly, has become a great obscurity. You can't find more than a few of these anywhere. Hopefully, a complete collection will someday find itself on DVD. Hanna-Barbera. Top Cat. This was essentially the Phil Silvers show in Catface. The premise was similar to that sitcom, also known as Sergeant Bilko. It was different for a cartoon because it didn't rely heavily on characters getting beat or blown up. There was a lot of trickery instead, and it was a very smart cartoon. The Yogi Bear Show. Yogi Bear, originally a backing segment of Huckleberry Hound, finally gets his own show. His show marks the debuts of Snagglepuss and Yankee Doodle. K-Row Productions. Calvin and the Colonel. This aired on ABC for just one season. It was an animated remake of Amos and Andy. More accurately, it was like Andy and the Kingfish, since there was no real equivalent of the Amos character. The characters were made into animals to avoid the touchy racial issues that had plagued Amos and Andy. This show belly flopped in the ratings, and barely lasted its one and only season. The connection to Amos and Andy, even with them being animals, really hurt it. The original voice actors of Amos and Andy, Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll, appeared on this show. People who were still fans of the real Amos and Andy didn't seem to appreciate the watered-down version of the show they loved so much. Truthfully, this cartoon didn't get a fair shake from anyone. It's not bad at all, especially for a kid-friendly TV cartoon. This is what happens when you pay attention to politics and cancel culture. Much younger people, who have no idea what Amos and Andy was or the controversy behind it, find these cartoons online and seem to like them just fine. Looney Tunes. Not much going on in Looney Tunes this year besides a handful of good cartoons, but they did introduce a new character. Although minor, he was memorable. Hugo the Abominable Snowman made his first appearance in the Bugs Bunny cartoon, The Abominable Snow Rabbit. As far as real Looney Tunes cartoons go, he was not seen again until the Spaced Out Bunny cartoon from the 1980 TV special Bugs Bunny's Bustin' Out All Over. After that, he's made a handful of minor appearances in newer Looney Tunes cartoons. MGM. Real Tom and Jerry cartoons stopped in 1958. They just did. I don't care what anyone says. The classic Tom and Jerry cartoons are still the most popular. Well, MGM didn't have their own animation department anymore, but they still wanted Tom and Jerry cartoons. They hired director Gene Deitch to make new Tom and Jerry cartoons. Rembrandt Films, a studio from Czechoslovakia, did the animation. They ended up making 12 new Tom and Jerry cartoons from 1961 to 62. These cartoons are extremely weird and lack the cuteness that made Tom and Jerry so endearing in the first place. At the time, they were commercially successful, but they were clearly living off the Tom and Jerry name. These cartoons stink. I'm not the only one who thinks so. Rankin Bass. Tales of the Wizard of Oz. This was the second ever cartoon series from Rankin Bass, and the first to feature traditional hand-drawn animation. If you're expecting something like the MGM musical, this ain't it. This is a series of short little cartoons featuring the Oz characters doing various funny things. The animation is crude and cheap. The voice work, however, is quite good, and the stories are creative. It's not one of the studio's best known cartoons, but has a cult following. Had the animation been a little bit better, this could have been a great hit. Such low budgets for TV cartoons can really hurt the final product. UPA. The Dick Tracy Show. The same studio that created Mr. Magoo created this cartoon show of Dick Tracy. It lasted just one season. I like the cartoon, but it's weird. It isn't very much like the Dick Tracy comic strip. The comic strip is a bit more violent and wouldn't translate well into a kid-friendly cartoon show. As a matter of fact, you don't see all that much of Dick Tracy. You see him in the beginning of the cartoon segments and at the end. Rarely will you see him in the middle part of the cartoon. he hands off an important case to one of his more cartoony underlings. The silly character would go after Dick Tracy's classic villains, who always worked in pairs. Some people like this show, and some people hate it. Despite having only one season of episodes, it was successful and aired in reruns for many years. It was brought back in reruns during the 1990 release of the hit film Dick Tracy, but has largely disappeared since then besides a complete series DVD release.